We are not at all surprised by such a snap decision by the Zelensky regime and its Western backers to request today's meeting. Many experts predicted that, suffering defeat on the front line and rapidly losing support even in the West, that the Kiev clique would use any pretext to attract global public attention to itself. Unfortunately, sirs, you chose a somewhat unfortunate pretext. Because if there's anything to talk about today, then it is exclusively the actions of the Ukrainian anti-air defense systems deployed in residential districts of Ukrainian towns and cities in violation of international humanitarian law. There have long been no doubts on this front among the users of Ukrainian social networks who are directly warning their fellow citizens about this. They are posting more and more videos online of Russian missiles and drones hitting military infrastructure targets and arms stores, causing the characteristic detonation, while Ukrainian anti-air missiles misfiring or going off course are hitting residential buildings and civilian objects. Or harm is being caused by debris falling in residential areas exclusively because Ukrainian air defense systems are located there. That was the case with the Spaso-Preobrazhensky Cathedral in Odessa, the destruction of which they tried to blame on Russia. That was also the case this morning in Kiev, Odessa, Lvov, Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, and other cities from where reports of casualties have been coming in. The representative of the United Kingdom shamelessly said that there would have been more victims if the Ukrainian air defense systems had not worked. Well, it's hard to imagine anything more cynical. If the Ukrainian air defense systems hadn't operated, then there wouldn't have been any victims among civilians at all. Therefore, we would advise that the United Kingdom be more cautious in its deliveries of anti-air defense missiles to the Kiev regime, the use of which is leading to the deaths of civilians. The Nazi regime is prepared to use Western weapons and anti-air missiles to kill not just the residents of Donbass, but also their own citizens in their homes and in civilian facilities. If Ukraine didn't violate international humanitarian law, there wouldn't have been any casualties, despite the truly massive strike launched by the aerospace forces of Russia yesterday and today on military targets across Ukraine, on targets of the military-industrial complex, the military airfield infrastructure, arsenals, and also stores of artillery shells, unmanned boats, arms and fuel for military hardware, the places where Ukrainian armed forces units are deployed, and formations of nationalists and foreign mercenaries. This is evident not just for experts, but also to any unbiased observer. Here, for example, is a link to a video with today's impact on a residential building in Kiev, which shows how a burning object slowly falls on the building, and only the upper floors of the building were damaged in this. A successfully operating missile at that speed and on that trajectory simply doesn't operate in that way. And it's clear that this is the result of Ukrainian air defense operations. By way of comparison, here is a link to another video showing today's impact of an Israeli missile on a residential building in Khan Younis in the south of the Gaza Strip. It shows not only the moment of impact of the missile, but also the fact that this multi-story building is left in ruins. You can only imagine the number of victims of this barbaric targeted strike, and in Gaza there are dozens of these a day, but of course that is not a basis for our Western colleagues to convene an emergency meeting of the Security Council. And here's a link to another photograph from Ukrainian social networks, taken following the impact on a multi-story building in Lvov. It shows how all of the walls of the building are speckled with marks from the damage agents of air defense missiles that hit the building. And these photos and videos on social networks today have been uploaded in their dozens, if not in their hundreds. They are being posted by Ukrainians who are indignant not only at the latest consequences of the operation of their own air defenses, but also the ongoing lies of the Zelensky regime that has brought his country to an almost fatal brink. Ukrainians are also furious because, contrary to the assurances of the head of the Kiev junta, they are being forced to fight for this corrupt, for sale and anti-popular government. Men of call-up age are being stopped in the streets, in public transport. Intimidation and violence are being used. Things have even got to the point where call-up papers are being given to the clergy, threatening them with repressions against their relatives. And then, without any training, they are being thrown onto the front line. One of the Ukrainian commanders the other day bemoaned the fact that these soldiers don't even have time to get their call signs. So quickly are they being killed. And into this senseless slaughter they are preparing to throw not only men but also women. At a recent press conference, Zelensky raised the stakes. He wants to send to certain death 500,000 people. To this end, a draft law has been drafted about new mobilization rules. It involves reducing the call-up age to 25, reducing the list of people exempt from mobilization, a voluntary compulsory census of men, a ban on leaving the country, any property transactions, and freezing bank accounts. And I could go on. Essentially, this is continuing to tighten the screws, and it's not without reason that some commentators are comparing this with serfdom. Against this backdrop, even pro-Western Ukrainians have had a dip in their optimism. Society no longer harbors any illusions. People understand perfectly well that the country has betrayed them, or rather the authorities of the country have betrayed them, that their husbands, brothers and sons are being sacrificed for the geopolitical aims of the West to constrain Russia and so that the corrupt regime can keep feeding at the trough. Recent surveys confirm this. 75% of Ukrainians are prepared to give up their citizenship in order not to be mobilized. These trends are clearly demonstrated by the panicked activity of those residents of the country who've managed to go abroad. They are now storming Ukrainian consulates abroad in the hope of extending their expired documents and transferring their property to their wives' names. Because as soon as that law enters into force, they will lose almost any rights in their country. This is the reality that today Ukrainians have to live with, but assessments of this total lawlessness, of course, we haven't heard today from any of the Western colleagues. The reality is also that today Ukraine is surviving exclusively thanks to colossal injections of financing from Washington, London and Brussels. Ukrainian civil servants, including diplomats, are getting their salaries from foreign states. Military hardware and outfitting for the Ukrainian armed forces is also coming from abroad. Long ago, the Zelensky regime lost everything that it had, that it was its own. Essentially, Ukraine today is nothing other than a private military company in the hands of Western countries, the job of which is to do as much harm to Russia as possible. It is exclusively this that guides the Western backers of the Kiev regime by giving them money, arms, and they have no care at all for the lives of ordinary Ukrainians. Colleagues, the reality today is such that Ukraine does not have and will not have the resources, not even to achieve a breakthrough, but just to maintain the situation as it is on the contact line. And it's not so much a question of the ineffective use by the Maidan regime of the weapons that they have been given. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kuleba, for example, directly linked the failure of the counteroffensive with the, and I quote, paltry, dire state of the defense industry and stockpiles in NATO countries, end quote. There's only one conclusion from this, and for our foes it is certainly not concerting. The military plans of the Kiev regime have suffered a total fiasco, and so very soon, for you and your Ukrainian proxies, you can expect the very worst news. And yet, regardless of whether Washington and Brussels will adopt new packages of military and financial assistance for Zelensky and his gang or not, this will only draw out the death throes of the regime, but certainly not prevent it. It is entirely clear that betting on a solution to the Ukrainian crisis on the battlefield was a failed and mistaken decision, and that the military victory over Russia is an absolutely unfeasible aim. And yet the threats stemming from Ukrainian territory created by NATO countries will certainly be eliminated, either within the bounds of the special military operation or with the use of political and diplomatic tools. And we never rejected the latter. We gave the Ukrainian leadership an excellent opportunity to preserve their territorial integrity, of course without Crimea, which back in 2014 decided to become a part of Russia, and also to preserve their territorial integrity and the lives of hundreds of thousands of their citizens. This was in March and April 2022. The fact that this was an excellent option for Ukraine was admitted recently by Ukrainian negotiator Chali. And the fact that the Kiev regime was not allowed to take this option by its bosses in London and Washington has now become a proven fact. The head of the Kiev junta after this, for some reason, also signed a decree that directly prohibited him from negotiating with the Russian leadership. That decree remains in force, which is something that those who reproach us for not wanting to negotiate is something that they seem to forget about. And so time for the Kiev regime is quickly running out. Its future is truly under serious threat. Ukrainian civilians, the Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture, however, has never been threatened by anything, however much in the West they try to prove the opposite. Our special military operation is not against them, but against the criminal Kiev regime that did not want to end the war against their own fellow citizens in the Donbass. Zelensky and his clique made their criminal choice, and they made that choice for all of the citizens of Ukraine. Our job now is to prevent him from destroying his people once and for all. We hope that at some point his Western backers will also realize this, and the sooner that happens, the better for Ukraine. Thank you.